following several major developing stories for you tonight. The release of the Comey transcript, the latest details in the Mueller investigation, and President Trump's announcement that his chief of staff, John Kelly, is leaving the White House. We've got a stellar guest lineup standing by to tackle all of the breaking news with Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman Darrell Issa, Michelle Malkin, Tom Fitton, Dan Bongino, to name a few. Plus, my opening statement straight ahead. But first, let's start with Fox News senior producer for Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, on all the latest and the newest details of the Comey transcript. Good evening, Chad.
Good evening. On 245 occasions, former FBI Director James Comey told House investigators either he didn't know, didn't recall, or couldn't remember things when asked. At the end of the session yesterday, Comey said they rehashed Hillary Clinton's emails, but frankly, there was not a lot of that in the transcript. The key number to recall tonight may not be 245. 4, that's the number. Here's the most significant part of the transcript. Comey said the FBI, quote, opened investigations on 4 Americans to see if there was any connection between those Americans and the Russian interference effort. Those 4 Americans did not include the candidate. That means President Trump. At different points in the interview, Comey defended special counsel Robert Mueller. He said he admires Mueller, said he would bet his life, that's a quote, that Mueller would do things the right way. Comey says he doesn't even have Mueller's phone number and that they aren't friends. Now, there's been a lot of criticism directed at former FBI agent Peter Strzok, his text messages, and whether or not he had anti-Trump bias. Comey told House members that it was Strzok who helped him draft the October 28, 2016 memo about Hillary Clinton. The Clinton campaign says that memo is why they lost the election. So Comey says it's hard to believe that Strzok was in league with Clinton and against Trump. Comey said yesterday in the hall and behind closed doors on Capitol Hill that he had confidence in the FISA process and the warrant to surveil Carter Page. But when asked who would sign off on the investigation of a major political campaign, Comey said he didn't know. Comey also said that he felt that President Trump asked him to halt the probe during their February 2017 meeting. Comey says that's why he wrote his memorandum. In addition, Comey says that President Obama did not ask him to investigate the Trump campaign. Now, this isn't over. Comey appears before the committees again on December 17th. Also, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch is due within a few days for an interview. Still, many conservatives aren't satisfied with this investigation. Republican Florida Representative Matt Gaetz says the way the committees handled this reminded him of, quote, the death rattle of Republican oversight. Jeanine?
All right, Chad, thanks so much. My next guest serves on both the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees, and he had a front row seat for Jim Comey's closed-door testimony. Congressman Jim Jordan joins me now. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. All right, so you were in the room at the time. Yep. 245 times, Comey, who was the head of the FBI in one of the most important cases in American history, a FISA warrant that was funded by the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton to spy on someone working in the Trump campaign, and that's the least of it, says he doesn't really know or remember that part of it. Did you believe him?
Well, you're right. 245 times he says don't remember, don't recall, and don't know. What was most, I guess, the biggest takeaway for me was the don't know part. Specifically, he didn't know much about Christopher Steele, the guy who they used his work product, the dossier, to go get the warrant to spy on the Trump campaign. He didn't know. He never met Chris Steele. Didn't know the relationship that Christopher Steele had with Bruce Orr, specifically that Christopher Steele was passing information to Bruce Orr, who was then giving it to the FBI. Didn't know that Christopher Steele was terminated for talking to the press. Didn't know he had talked to the press. Didn't know they continued to work with Christopher Steele after he had been terminated and continued to get his information. So I was mostly struck by that. Here's the key player, the guy who put together the dossier that was the basis for getting the warrant, and you didn't know anything about him. I find that hard to believe, but those were his answers yesterday.
Well, you know, clearly he and his lawyer went over all of the areas where he could possibly contradict himself from other hearings, other sworn testimony, from his book, and a number of interviews. But for a case of this significance, when he actually went to the President of the United States to talk about an unverified dossier, so from the time that he heard about it, the time that he approved the warrant in the FBI, FBI, and he had to do it. You and I both know it at least 2, if not 3 or 4 times.
Right.
He goes to the president, talks about it, and never says to his staff, gee, where do we get this from? Who's this guy, Christopher Steele? You and I both know from the public information that Christopher Steele was paid by the FBI for other information. He was a confidential informant.
Right.
I mean, is there any way to get this guy in any kind of jeopardy for perjury and lying?
Well, no, I think you make a good point, because remember, on January 6th of 2017, he goes to New York and briefs President-elect Trump about the salacious and unverified dossier. So he thinks it's important enough to brief the president-elect, but yet he doesn't know anything about the guy who wrote it. Doesn't know that, for example, Christopher Steele told Bruce Orr, who then told the FBI that Christopher Steele had said he was desperate to stop Trump from being president. That was what Bruce Orr conveyed to the FBI. He doesn't know any of that information, but yet he's going to brief the president-elect about this. And as we know, what happened after that meeting on January 6th in New York, it was quickly leaked. CNN and BuzzFeed all then printed the entire dossier for the public to see. So that to me was hard to figure out. Like, how did you not know anything about the guy who was your main source for this whole thing?
It's not only that, Jim. Listen, you know, anybody who has been a prosecutor, who's the head of the FBI, he is a political operative, and I'm going to talk about this in my open in a few minutes. But I guess one is left with, Jim, and this is nothing on you because you fought so hard, but one is left with certain questions like, will the Clintons ever be held accountable? Will Jim Comey, who decided to, and who was insubordinate, according to the Inspector General, by jumping into the Attorney General's shoes and saying, I'm going to exonerate her, no prosecutor would try the woman, is he ever going to be held accountable? The Clintons, what about the Russia collusion? You guys, with all due respect, to get to this guy now, 2 or 3 weeks before the beginning of the year, I'm embarrassed for you.
No,
I really am.
Look, it should have happened a long time ago.
So why didn't it? Jim, why didn't it? You're a fighter.
I know, and we've been pushing for it, and I tell you what we're pushing for now, Judge.
Jim, who stopped you?
Ultimately, it's the House leadership and it's the chairman who decide these things. But remember, Judge, what we have to do in the next few weeks is we have to get Rod Rosenstein in front of us. Because remember, it's now been almost 12 weeks since the New York Times reported that Rod Rosenstein said to subordinates in the Justice Department that he was thinking about wearing a wire to record the president and thinking about invoking the 25th Amendment, and we've yet to ask him question 1. So that's the most important thing, in my judgment, over the next 3 weeks before this Congress ends, is to get Rod Rosenstein in, just like James Comey was yesterday, and ask him those questions.
Do it. You guys come on and you talk about it all the time. And Jim, you know I love you, but enough of this nonsense. The American public has had it with you guys.
Trust me, Mark Meadows, Matt Gaetz, and I are pushing to get that done. We are pushing every single day to get that done. But we can't issue the subpoena.
Okay, I said right with Obamacare, Ryan should have been gone, and I took a lot of heat for it, and that was 1.5 years ago or whatever it was. All right, this guy doesn't have the president or American people's interests at heart. Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
So, Jim Comey decides that he's going to come out of the meeting with the president, take all these notes, leak them to his friend at Columbia Law School who's a non-government employee. I mean, this sanctimonious, holier-than-thou egomaniac who has to be at the center of everything. He's used to keeping this stuff close to the vest because he's part of and in charge of the deep state, and he's going to get away with it, isn't he?
Well, we'll see. One of the things that did happen yesterday, too, is I asked him that meeting when he had with the president in February, where the president says, could you see your way clear to make sure Mike Flynn is okay? And Comey goes back and he memorializes that, becomes part of the Comey memos. He then has a meeting with his top people, McCabe, Baker, his top people. And I asked him yesterday, I said, why didn't you, if you're so concerned about this, you have to memorialize it. And as you say, Judge, he later leaks it to Daniel Richman in the New York Times. If you're so concerned about what the president said, why didn't you share it with the Attorney General? Why didn't you share it with the top law enforcement individual in our government? And his answer was, oh, well, we thought Jeff Sessions was going to be recusing himself at some point.
So what? He hadn't recused himself at that point.
He had not. And share that information. But I think it points to Comey, the same way he handled the Clinton investigation and took it away from Loretta Lynch. He and his cabal at the FBI, they were the ones in control. They wanted to keep this information tight. He wanted to create a record to promote this idea that there may have been some obstruction. I don't think there was, but I think he was trying to generate and create this and didn't share it with anyone at the Justice Department, the top people in our and law enforcement in our government.
Some sanctimonious, arrogant, condescending individual, and I know him. Not you. Congressman Jim Jordan, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
You bet, Judge. Thank you.
All right. Dan Bongino, Michelle Malkin still on deck tonight. So's my opening statement, and I'm teed off. But next, another man who was in the room as James Comey was grilled yesterday, Congressman Darrell Issa, is next. And he's leaving Washington at the end of the month, so he can't hold anything back. What's his take on this testimony? Find out next. Welcome back. As we continue to follow several developing stories here on Justice, including the release of transcripts of James Comey's meeting with lawmakers yesterday and new information from Robert Mueller regarding Michael Cohen and President Trump. Congressman Darrell Issa is up in a moment, but first, better late than never, my open. It's time for the left to fold up their fantasy tents. If they hate Donald Trump so much, maybe they should focus on winning the 2020 presidential election instead of this Russia collusion delusion nonsense that's been wasting our time, our money, and dividing our nation for the past 2 years. The nonstop personal vendetta against the president by Mueller and his rabid team of Trump-hating prosecutors, breathlessly reported by the Trump-hating media at every turn, is so intense that they proudly beat their leftist chests every time they issue an indictment against someone, anyone, most of whom are living in Russia and will never be brought to justice here or anywhere else for that matter, or have been indicted for events that preceded Trump, or for lying to the FBI, which we later find out wasn't even considered a lie by the FBI agents, or is so serious that one guy got a whopping 14 days in jail. Bottom line, none of the indictments the special counsel has brought has tied the president to Russia. But you wouldn't know it from these guys.
A lot of paper here tonight, but the one thing that jumped out at me is the President of the United States, individual one, directed a crime.
So right now we have a sitting President of the United States who committed 2 felonies while running for president.
And so if history means anything in the Trump era, if precedent means anything in the Trump era, Donald Trump must be impeached because of the crimes prosecutors say he committed in the Michael Cohen case.
Robert Mueller is essentially then saying, here, Congress, here's an impeachable offense. You decide.
I think what this totality of today's filings show that the House is going to have little choice the way this is going other than to start impeachment proceedings.
So did the president direct a felony? If Michael Cohen, who is probably one of the most flawed prosecution witnesses I've ever seen, and that's saying something, is relied upon to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump circumvented campaign finance laws, they might just as well be whistling Dixie up the Mississippi. Permit me. Number one, if the president directed any payment, why? What was his state of mind? What was he thinking? What wasn't he thinking? Do you really think Michael Cohen knows? Maybe he didn't want his wife to find out. Maybe he didn't want his family to find out. Maybe he was trying to prevent any tarnish on his brand. Or maybe to simply get the woman off his back. It wouldn't be the first time a high-profile person paid to get rid of a nuisance lawsuit. Now, there is a presumption of innocence in every criminal case and every criminal investigation, and never a presumption against that without evidence that acts are done for purely criminal reasons. And don't forget, it was citizen Donald Trump's money that was used and not campaign money for whatever might have occurred before he was president, unlike another president impeached for acts that occurred with a young intern in the Oval Office while he was president. And so far, 30 million taxpayer dollars for this nonsense. It's nonsense, especially because Barack Obama was in a position to actually do something about so-called Russian interference, but did nothing except to tell Putin to knock it off. And even that I don't believe. And as for the testimony of holier-than-thou Cardinal James Comey, the grandstanding political operative who believes the rules don't apply to him and who fought so hard to testify in an open setting, I'm left with only one thought. Jim, why the hell did you want your testimony before House and Judiciary and Oversight Committees to be in public? Jim, you readily admitted almost 250 times that you didn't recall or didn't remember. Honestly, it would have been and is less embarrassing for you to do it behind closed doors. But Slippery Jim says he doesn't remember important facts about the most important FISA case in American history that required his approval. He states it doesn't matter where the fake dossier came from. Yet he still has total confidence in the FISA process that he corrupted. Now, I don't have to go over this again. Comey's been found by the Inspector General to have mishandled the Clinton email investigation, to have lied before Congress, not about exonerating Hillary, before the investigation was done, and to be an admitted leaker of sensitive information that he wanted to get to the New York Times through his friend. And when asked if he would have fired the lovers on his staff, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who openly communicated their hatred and disdain for candidate Donald Trump, yet all the while investigating him, Comey states he can't answer in the abstract. He doesn't deny he would have allowed them to stay on the Clinton investigation in spite of their hate, as long as they gave an explanation. No surprise, Jim, since you're a pal of the Clintons. But most shocking is Comey's role in the theater of the absurd. A fake dossier paid for by a woman who's his friend running for president. And he's best friends with the special counsel in charge of the case. And he doesn't remember key details like the party who funded it, in the most blatant display of public corruption and personal political cover in American history. Shame on you, Jim. And that's my open. Tell me what you think on my Facebook and Twitter, #JudgeJeanine. Congressman Darrell Issa, who serves on both the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees, was there for Comey's testimony yesterday and joins me now. Congressman, what struck you in that room yesterday with Comey pontificating to you guys?
Well, I guess unless he's got early onset of Alzheimer's, there's no way you can write two things. Either he wasn't doing his job and he just didn't pay any attention, or he just perjured himself about all the things he didn't know or didn't remember. And by the way, saying you don't remember when you do, or saying you didn't know when you do, is in fact perjury. And that's what I think is really in the long run going to be recognized about him, is that he did a lie of amnesia rather than in fact simply not telling us the truth.
But you know, Congressman, as you leave Congress, you know, this is, you know, the last few weeks that you've got. I don't know if you heard me with Congressman Jim Jordan, but I have to tell you, I am embarrassed. I am furious. I am frustrated. The American people have had it. You guys were in power, and it's not on you, because I've seen you in oversight and government reform. I've seen you go after people. What can the American people expect going forward? Will the Clintons ever pay for what they did, which was the real Russia collusion? Will we ever find out who did the unmasking of people like Michael Flynn? Will anyone like Samantha Power and the rest of them be held accountable? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, if people will recognize that some people in Congress did their job and they were thwarted often by the leadership that wanted to maintain their majority, that majority being gone now, then they won't do it again. They'll realize that standing on principle and doing the right thing may or may not cost you the majority, but playing this sort of prevent defense, to use a football term, will inevitably lead to your losing the majority without getting the job done. Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and others have been fighters for the last 2 years, but they've fought with some hands tied behind their back.
Okay, so let's talk about Paul Ryan. I mean, how did it advantage Paul Ryan to not allow you guys to bring contempt charges, to do this earlier? I mean, was he working against the president?
No, he wasn't working against the president. But again, you know, he announced that he was leaving about a year ago. So he's been a lame duck for quite a while. And quite frankly, Chairman Goodlatte, although he's a good man, I don't think he saw the reality that you have to do everything immediately because the other side is running out the clock on you. When he finally started going after Comey managed to delay this for weeks and weeks. And this is the frustration, is you have to start quickly because the FBI, the Department of Justice, institutionally knows how to slow you down.
Well, you know, I got to go back to, I mean, I don't care if Paul Ryan's a lame duck, and I don't care if Goodlatte's a nice guy. Joe Blow watching this show tonight knows that you guys got to get in there and fight. You had the power, and you didn't benefit us by it. It was a game where we kept getting punched in the gut by people who were laughing at us, saying one thing and saying it didn't mean what they were saying, like Peter Strzok. Jim Comey getting out there and saying, oh, no, you know, we have to reopen this investigation, which was nonsense. The feds in the Southern District forced him to do it, and the NYPD on the Clinton email. There's so much I could go through, so much my viewers know.
But I'll tell you, Judge, I'm going to, because you said I have nothing to lose, I can say what I believe. Let me tell you something that you do need to make sure your viewers understand. Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and a team of people who made sure that these hearings, Trey Gowdy, made sure that there were hearings 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year, in fact, are the reason that Hillary Clinton isn't president and Donald Trump is. If Hillary Clinton had gotten away with it in front of the voters, the fact is she'd be president today. So I want to commend the people I served with who fought against leadership that always wanted to say don't make waves, fought against and made sure the American people, when they went to the polls and voted for and elected Donald Trump, understood they had a choice of a man who was going to do what he said or a woman who lied about everything she ever did.
Well, Congressman Darrell Issa, I must tell you that, you know, my viewers, that I personally am sad that you're leaving. I think you've done a great job. I don't know if anybody congratulates you in the end or if you even get a watch that says congratulations. But we thank you for your service to this country. We thank you for being honest and for doing what you did. Thanks so much for being with us, Congressman.
Keep fighting.
Oh, no worries. All right, Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch still ahead, and next, my political panel tackles all of today's developing news. A new foil for Dan Bongino tonight. Ari Aramesh joins Dan in a moment for a spirited debate on Jim Comey, Robert Mueller, President Trump, and more. Next. Developing news to get to with my political panel tonight, so let's jump right in. NRA TV host and author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump, Dan Bongino, joins me, along with Democrat strategist Ari Aramesh. Okay, welcome, Ari. All right, guys, the White House today, after the Mueller filing, says that there was nothing of value in the new Mueller filings, while Trump tweets they totally clear him. All right, Ari, hit it.
What planet, Mr. President, are you living on? Your campaign chair, deputy campaign chair, national security advisor, your personal fixer and lawyer for 12 years are either going to jail, pleading guilty, or they're in hot waters up to here. Mr. President, you got a lot of turbulence ahead. Buckle up and sit in your seat. Stop tweeting, please. You're giving us ammunition. These are predicates. This is evidence. Stop tweeting.
I don't even know what to say. I got to deal with this all the time. They always tell you all this stuff, but notice what they leave out.
There is still to this day zero evidence of collusion. So let me get this straight. For the last 2 years, $30 million later, we have this investigation. We have taxi cab confessions. We have FARA violations. A guy didn't declare he was a lobbyist.
Wait.
Hold on. We have a guy. We have a fibber, and we have another guy. Why are they all going to jail? Because we have $30 million of government assets applied to.
Cohen he's getting recommendations for 3 years.
Where's the collusion?
Cohen.
But where's the collusion?
Collusion is one every one of these guys. Hold on one second. Hold on. Cohen said right during the campaign, they sat down at the Trump Tower talking about business in Russia, trying to get in touch with Putin, give him a $50 million apartment or condo in New York.
Let me ask you, wait, hold on.
You know what? To be nice with him. And guess what? When when a presidential candidate comes out and says, hey, WikiLeaks, we're talking about Julian Assange, the dirtiest of the dirtiest, says Julian Assange jeopardize American lives, jeopardize classified information, but I want dirt on Hillary. If that's not treason, I don't know what treason is.
Wow. Let me ask you a question. So meeting with Russians is a bad thing, right?
Absolutely. You know what? Meeting with the adversary to try to get elected is a betrayal of American identity.
That was a filibuster, but it bothers you, right? So we've established your principles that meeting with Russians.
Roger that.
Does it bother you at all that the Russians that showed up to meet in Trump Tower are connected to Hillary Clinton's orbit?
That is, again, what planet?
Okay.
What planet?
Ari, I'm sorry, you just don't know the facts of the case. The
lawyer,
Natalia Veselnitskaya, folks, please put this at home.
Let's Wikipedia.
No, time out. Let me respond, because you'll see that you're going to be embarrassed by this. Veselnitskaya worked for Fusion GPS, who was working for Hillary, and Rinat Akhmetshin. Hold on, stand by.
The cousin of the guy who went to someone's bar mitzvah in 2009 had a guy who did his bris back in 2010. Wow, that is our evidence. Smoking gun.
He suggested on the air, and I got him on the record, that meeting with Russians was bad. But apparently working with people who actually are Russian to get political intel is not bad. The intel guy who shows up at the scene, Rinat Akhmetshin, do you know who his lawyer is?
Again, his guy who went to someone's bar mitzvah in 08, who's got a neighbor, who's got a cousin who works at some joint and is connected to the Bananas and the Gambinos. Now that's your evidence?
His wife was actually a higher-up in the Bill Clinton administration.
Wait a minute. Let me make it direct, Ari.
Let's do it.
Focus. $145 million from the Russia company that they sold uranium to. 20% of American uranium.
Have you heard of
$500,000 in Bill. Don't interrupt me.
We have something called
$500,000 in Bill Clinton's pocket for a 20-minute speech in Moscow.
Those are not facts. Those are not facts. But I got news.
Television.
Judge, 2019 is going to be a great year because these guys are in so much trouble. So much trouble.
Are so angry because you lost. Go ahead. Let's talk about Michael Cohen. I want to talk about. We talked about. Let's talk about Mueller. Yeah. Okay. Jim Comey says, I'm not friends with Mueller. Who's he kidding?
Yeah, and Mueller, it's odd that he's found all these kind of like taxi cab confession stuff and all this other nonsense with them. But you just pointed out a fact, and Ari's running from it. Bill Clinton did, in fact, this is a fact, whether you think it's a fact or not doesn't make it not a fact, took $500,000 from a bank that was intimately involved in gauging the financial viability of the Uranium One sale. I don't know how that's, so you have a problem with meeting with Russians, but you don't have a problem taking $500,000 from a Russian bank involved in the sale of our uranium? That doesn't strike you as odd?
The two things are going to happen.
Go ahead.
The Republicans in the Senate don't have the guts to convict a president after impeachment. Hold on.
You're not answering what he's saying. Don't tell me to hold on. Respond to what he said.
The day Trump loses the election and Melania leaves him because of all the porn star this and porn star that.
You know, it's just this is a very
and President Trump is a nice guy. Why so thin-skinned?
Leave Melania out of it.
No, she's part of this game.
She's a class act and a lady with higher
Michelle
approval.
Obama was a class act.
Oh, really?
Michelle Obama is a true lady. And guess what? Melania Trump, if she cannot plagiarize for once,
I mean,
if she can write a book, if she can write a book without plagiarizing, I'd be friends with Melania too. But you know what? Melania's going to leave the president the moment he's out of office.
And you know what? You're out of line.
And the president can hire any porn star he wants.
You're out of line.
He can hire any porn star he wants.
Ari, does it bother you that the Hillary Clinton dossier that she paid for, that the guy who wrote it said he got the information from Russian intelligence?
It bothers me the president's compromised.
That doesn't bother you.
And he's paying off porn stars. And it bothers me that the family values crowd in this country is okay. With a president who doesn't even know how to say the Lord's Prayer. That's the problem. That's the problem.
But paying off Russians, he has no problem.
Paying off hookers and prostitutes and you name it.
Prostitutes.
Donald J. Trump. Mr. President, time to resign.
Even Christopher Steele admits he can't verify the dossier. The head of the FBI, don't laugh at me. The head of the FBI.
I'm laughing at the idea. It's so out of whack. It's
the
so
head
out
of the
whack.
FBI who goes to brief the president 4 months after he uses that dossier, a fraud on the FISA court, which should be investigated. Yep. He goes in and says, I can't verify it. There are a bunch of bobos in the
You know Trump can't sleep well, and he can't sleep well, and he's going to have a lot of sleepless nights, Judge.
Yeah,
and guess
you
what?
Guys, you know what?
Oh, we're going to give him hell because he deserves it. He deserves
you know what? Why don't you
we
be
picked
a
up 40 seats.
Loser. Last word.
We picked up 40 seats. The loser is the GOP, Judge.
We also won back the Senate. These guys are terrified. They have nothing on impeachment. They've been at it for 2 years. They're conspiracy theorists. They know they're going down that road. There is zero evidence of collusion, and they're panicking. So next thing they're going to tell us is that Cohen was arrested for jaywalking. We should impeach the president.
Dan Bongino, Ari Aramesh, thanks so much. And Michelle Malkin still ahead to weigh in on all of this. But first, I'll talk live with Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton, who's got a lot of answers in a moment. My next guest says special counsel Mueller is again dishonestly insinuating Russian misconduct to smear President Trump. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton joins me now with more on that and his reaction to the Comey testimony transcript. All right, good evening, Tom. Thanks for being with us tonight. You know, before I get into Comey and Mueller, I want to talk to you about a decision that didn't make a lot of news, but to me is extremely significant. A federal judge apparently gave Judicial Watch, you as the president of Judicial Watch, the ability to do additional fact-finding into whether Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server was deliberate and an effort to thwart freedom of information. Why now? What does it mean?
Well, the judge has been waiting for other court cases to come to a conclusion to see what else was out there to be found. He's upset about what the Justice Department and the State Department did in terms of keeping away from the court and Judicial Watch information about this email scheme. Remember, it was Judicial Watch's litigation that uncovered the Clinton email server and all those emails. They were forced to admit to the court they had this material, and the judge is furious that they didn't admit it earlier, and he's angry at this Justice Department judge for coming in and trying to defend the indefensible by trying to explain away what went on. So he authorized Judicial Watch to take discovery into what Mrs. Clinton was doing, how the State Department and the Justice Department were handling the email system and the results of our requests. And so it's a big deal. We have 10 days only to come up with a discovery plan.
Okay, but the discovery plan, does that mean you could put people under oath?
Yeah, it would mean we would take testimony of witnesses and gather documents and the sort of other evidence gathering lawyers engage in as they're trying to comply here with a court order. We have a court mandate to do this.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing is, you know, I had Congressman Issa and Congressman Jordan on, and I wasn't too happy with the fact that all this stuff is happening now, just a couple of weeks before the Democrats take over. We had all three House, the Senate, and the White House, and very little was done. But Congressman Issa took solace in the fact that by bringing this stuff out, and you are the tip of the spear as it relates to identifying information that even Congress can't get, that is in itself somewhat satisfactory in terms of getting some semblance of justice. But in the end, will Hillary Clinton, you believe, ever be made accountable for all of the not just injustices, but all of her dalliances from the law?
It's going to be up to Bill Barr, the new incoming Attorney General, whether or not he's going to allow James Comey have the final word as to what Hillary Clinton did. There's still a lot of more information to be found. Remember, she not only violated laws against the mishandling classified information, but she took government documents, she destroyed them. Yeah, there's all sorts of concerns about her truthfulness.
She deleted 30,000 emails. I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and the truthfulness of her testimony. I haven't heard this Justice Department, maybe you have, Judge Jeanine, describe what it thinks about what James Comey did. Do they agree that James Comey that she didn't violate the laws against mishandling classified information, that no reasonable prosecutor would have brought a case? Silence. And I'm tired of the silence, but thankfully there's a court interested in getting additional information about what she did, and that's all we can do is get the information out there, and if prosecutors don't do their job, that's why the American people are unhappy. And frankly, it's why the president ought to be extremely unhappy.
Well, Tom Fitton, thank you for what you're doing and the efforts of your getting information before the American public that Congress cannot, irrespective of whether we get justice in the end. I think that, you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Tom Fitton, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
All right. And syndicated columnist and author Michelle Malkin is next. Welcome back to Justice on this busy night of news. Here now with more reaction to Comey's shocking testimony, as well as the latest in the Mueller case. Syndicated columnist and author Michelle Malkin joins me now. All right, Michelle, a lot to talk about. I'd like to start with, you know, the Mueller probe and the left and you know, MSNBC, CNN, and everyone saying the impeachment is coming immediately or the indictment is coming immediately. What say you?
Well, it's a roller coaster of bloviation, hyperventilation, and still the same bottom line that you outlined so well in your opening statement, Judge. There is still not one shred, not one iota of evidence of any kind of Russian collusion and President Trump. And yet they continue, and this is what they're going to do. They announced it even the day before Trump ever took office, that the plan here, the plan all along has been resistance, resistance, resistance. And so, of course, they're going to be screaming bloody impeachment at the top of the lungs, even though at the end of the day with this Comey transcript and the release of it, even with the redactions, still nothing, nothing, nothing. The bottom line, that dossier is still fake. Mueller is a snake, and Comey is a flake.
Let's talk about Comey and Mueller. Oh, look, Comey is denying that he and Mueller are pals when just about everybody knows that the two of them were part of the same team in that John Ashcroft hospital room when Comey went in and saved the world, or at the very least America, you know, relying on Bob Mueller and the FBI. And their careers have crossed and they've worked together for years. What say you on that?
Yes, I've got whiplash because it was the mainstream media itself, the anti-Trump media, the Washington Post, which had a long piece about the best buds, Mueller and Comey, and now denying it simply because President Trump tweeted about it and tweeted what the truth actually is. You know, with Comey especially too. Look, here's somebody who's got more holes in his memory and his brain than an industrial-sized colander. You know, fidelity, bravery, integrity, and the guy denied knowing. I mean, as much as the I don't remembers bother me, it's the I don't knows, 166 of them in that transcript, to basic questions about whether he knew whether Christopher Steele was working for Fusion GPS at the same time that he was collaborating with the FBI. Basic questions about whether they had presented the exculpatory evidence that not obligated, okay, but they are legally required to present to the FISA court. And what I think the American people need to be most outraged about is the weaponization of FISA for political ends to stop Trump.
And you know what? In that regard, Michelle, let's talk for a minute about the fact that this FISA court knows that it was used. This FISA court knows that in the end, the repeated signing of the warrant, I believe 3 times, on what is still today an unverified dossier paid for by a candidate, and no one's saying boo. What is John Roberts doing? What is the Chief Justice of the United States doing when his court was one upon which a fraud was committed?
Absolutely correct, Judge Jeanine. Where is the accountability for this? The weaponization, the corruption of our FISA courts, which were intended, which were erected to protect our national security, and now are meant to protect Democrat operatives and Democrat moles and the entire swamp, which is committed to bringing our president down. It is a danger and a threat and a menace to our public safety.
All right, Michelle.
Where's the accountability?
Thank you so much, Michelle Malkin. We'll be right back.
You bet, Judge.
Finally tonight, if you want to tee off the New York Times, buy my book this Christmas season, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, the case against the anti-Trump conspiracy.